Hi there, listener. Cass here. I'm going to jump in before we get started with this week's episode. Not only is this a very long episode, it's also an incredibly heavy episode. I want to provide ample content warnings. Some of these are things which are simply mentioned in passing, and some of these are things which we talk about more in depth. I understand that a trigger can just be a mention of something, which is why I do include things which are only being mentioned in passing. With all of that said, before we get into the content warnings, as always, heed these, and if this isn't the episode for you, that is totally okay. Please do not harm yourself or put yourself through any discomfort to listen to this. Next week, we will be talking about KDA and Lil Miquela and parasocialism there, and the week after, we'll be talking about Ready Player One in a more conversational, lighthearted tone. Again, this episode is also highly politically charged and does speak about relevant moments happening in history right now. So if you come to this podcast as a moment of levity away from the current state of the world, this probably, again, is not the episode for you, and that is totally okay. All that being said, I'm going to read the list of content warnings now. Stalking, social isolation, the COVID-19 pandemic, child trafficking, QAnon, conspiracy theories, J.K. Rowling, transphobia, trans-exclusionary rhetoric, gender essentialism, cancel culture, fascism, anti-Semitism, fat phobia, menstruation, genital mutilation, oppressive states of Islam in specific, cult tactics, mental health, unlicensed medical advice, Donald J. Trump, American politics, execution, the 2020 summer protests that were in reference and reaction to the murder of George Floyd by the police, fascism, the alt-right and the far-right, racism, misogyny, the Me Too movement, conversion therapy, the Proud Boys, Nazi iconography, child abuse, murder, anti-blackness, the rapist Brock Turner, the riot on January 6, 2020, which took place in D.C., and toxic masculinity. Those are difficult topics or triggering for you. I strongly recommend you don't engage with this episode. Again, that's totally okay. Once more, next week we'll be talking about parasocialism with KDA and Lil Miquela, and the week after we'll be talking more conversationally about Ready Player One. I hope you have a wonderful day and enjoy the episode, and please stay safe. Thank you. Hi, welcome to Author's Note.
Don't like, don't listen.
My name is Cass.
And my name's Teese.
Let's do some housekeeping before we get started.
Okay.
If you, as a listener, would like to speak to us about the podcast or something in a podcast episode, please contact us via our podcast account, whether that be through email or Twitter. Don't DM one of us individually for the podcast, because we're just going to end up showing it to each other anyway and like crafting a response together.
We do it as a family. It's good.
Yeah, it's a family situation. But yeah, please try and keep those relatively separate if you could. We offer our Twitters so that like you can find us and engage with our work that's separate from the podcast, not so much so that you have a direct line to talk to us about something in the podcast. Just keep it over on the podcast account. Makes it easier for everyone.
DMs are open.
Yeah, exactly.
Shoot us a DM on the podcast account, please.
In this episode, specifically, we're going to be talking about fictional characters and how you cannot harm them or cancel them. And we are speaking specifically in this episode about the use of adult characters to further personal or corporate beliefs. Be mindful of the context of this episode, you know. Be a critically thinking adult when we talk about these things. This is not, us speaking about child characters or any of that. Additionally, we're a pretty conversational podcast, so there's going to be inherent bias in our views because of our life experiences. So with us, as with any other media you might consume, we're just asking you to be thoughtful and critical of what you're hearing. Engage with us on a level that you would like to, obviously, but, take everything we say with a grain of salt, just like I would ask you to do of anything else you're watching. Under no circumstances is it ever okay for you to go and bother the people we talk about on this podcast, even if we're talking about them positively. It is totally unacceptable for you to bother, annoy, harass these people. We do not condone the harassment of anyone we talk about. It is entirely unacceptable behavior. It is so out of line. If you happen to ever catch wind of somebody doing that and using our podcast as their basis for that, let us know, because that's totally unacceptable. We do not approve of that. That is absolutely not okay. No matter the opinion we express about these people, most of the time I would recommend you just don't engage with them. Leave them alone. Be a responsible adult on the internet and stop bullying people, but stop harassing them too.
I'm nodding my head. I mean, I know this is an audio format, but I'm nodding my head along to what Cass is saying. So what Cass is saying, I agree with, for the record.
To the Twitter user who requested a Dragon Age episode, I am sincerely sorry that the monkey paw curled this way for you. We will come back to Dragon Age one day, but there are so many topics that we could talk about with Dragon Age that it would probably need to be its own miniseries, and Teese doesn't play Dragon Age. So those would be like cast episodes unless I can get Teese to play Dragon Age. Probably won't happen.
But on that note, Cass, have you consumed any fun media this past week?
No. I mean, I've been playing a lot of Stardew Valley. My week has kind of been taken up by research for this episode.
Fair.
So if I haven't been doing that, I've been playing Stardew.
But you did get that special little event, didn't you? You were telling me about that special event?
Yeah, I got it because my farm was pretty much empty. But in Stardew Valley, apparently there's this like really rare event that'll happen where every day when you wake up, the random number generator looks at your farm, picks 50 tiles, and if all 50 of them are completely empty, it spawns an owl statue.
Yay!
And I got it twice.
Wow, that's
so now
pretty
I have
cool.
2 owl statues.
Congratulations.
What's up? My hot tip for making that happen is just not have anything on your farm during the winter.
Yay.
What have you been watching, Teese?
Well, Cass, right before we started the episode, I played through the game Anatomy, and boy, did that slap.
What kind of game is it?
It's a indie game made by Kitty Horror Show, who is a horror game creator. It's a 45-minute long game. You could buy it on itch.io for like $3. I tipped $2 more, so
hell yeah,
sexy.
tip for those itch.io games.
Yeah, we love to tip in this house. We respect creators. And so I spent maybe $5 to be scared shitless for 45 minutes, probably for an hour. I was scared shitless for an hour, I'd say.
Is it 3D? Is it pixel? What's the deal?
It's a walking sim.
Okay.
So you take a little walk around a house and you collect cassette tapes, and the cassette tapes tell you about how a house is like a body. And one of my favorite genres of horror, I believe it's a very untapped genre, is house horror. I love some good old architectural horror.
Monster House?
Yeah. Yeah.
Teese's favorite movie, Monster House.
Monster House.
Was that Robert Zemeckis?
I don't even know. But like similar to House of Leaves or Control, or I think it's pronounced Dianea House, which was a creepypasta back in the day. I love some good, tasty house horror, and this was truly a treat for me because I did not hear about it literally until today. And that's what I've been up to, because otherwise this week for Teese has also been, oh god, what do I do? Can I do anything for myself? So
it's been a rough week.
Yeah, it has.
It's been a rough week.
But it's okay. It's okay. You know what? Each week is a new week, which means it's a new reset and a new refresh. And
I mean, there's something really fun going on right now. And I mean, can you imagine being impeached twice? Not me.
Not me.
Couldn't be me.
Couldn't be me. I mean, I don't think I have the ability nor the mental fortitude to be president at all. I think if I am stressed more than 2 degrees than I normally am, I get heartburn. So could you imagine what it would be to be president? I think a hole might burn through my stomach and my esophagus if I were president.
I'm just thinking about your, was it 48-hour heartburn horror story you had?
It was 21 hours. Thank you very much.
Teese's 4-year-long stint with heartburn and indigestion.
Wow, just like JFK.
Stop.
But like, one time, TJ Maxx was too crowded and I got heartburn. TJ Maxx.
You're a chihuahua.
I really am. So I don't think I could ever be president, and therefore I can never be impeached 2 times in a row.
If you're coming to this episode for some levity and non-political discussion, this may not be the episode this week for you. Our topic, this is a two-part, series. It was originally going to be one episode, and then there was a giant influx of information, and I fell down a rabbit hole. As you've garnered from the title, we're talking about parasocial relationships and how they're being used both for corporate profit and to proliferate propaganda or political ideas. So we're going to be talking about that Dragon Age Day incident where Greg Ellis released a roleplay video of him as Cullen to do a lot of different things. So it's probably, if you are not up for a political discussion, probably not the episode for you. That's totally okay. If you also are a huge fan of Cullen as a character, and you feel like knowing some things about Greg Ellis being maybe not a great person will ruin him for you. It's clearly very upsetting for Eskel. Also, probably not the episode for you. Come back next week. We're going to be talking about KDA and Lil Michaela. But this week we are talking about Greg Ellis, the Dragon Age Day Cullen video, and the absolute shitstorm that is that. Are you ready, Teese?
Oh my god. Guys, I want you all to know that Cass's notes is 20 pages long.
Listen.
Oh boy. This is going to be like when I think my Final Fantasy VII house notes were like 10 pages long. So this is going to be just as exciting, I feel like. So.
Oh. It has been a weirdly exhausting week. It's some heavy topics for sure, and a lot of this is going to involve some tangents and discussions to kind of lay the groundwork, because I want people to have a full understanding and context for how we're entering the Cullen address on Dragon Age Day. If you are unfamiliar with the concept of parasocialism, it has become a lot more pertinent to talk about, especially given the pandemic, because we are spending so much time engaging with fictional media, YouTubers, etc. There's a fantastic paper. It's totally free. It's totally accessible. It's in Communication Research Trends, Volume 38, Number 2, and it's by Liebers and Schramm. It is a collection and analysis of years and years of parasocial research. So, reading from this digest, parasocialism was originally introduced by Horton and Wohl in 1956. The term parasocial interaction describes a one-sided, mediated form of social interaction between the audience and media characters. Parasocial relationships exceed this limit and lead to encompassing cross-situational relationships between the audience and media characters. Hence, unlike parasocial interaction, parasocial relationships can, much like real social relationships, endure beyond a single reception and develop into a long-term relationship between a media user and a media character. I think a fantastic example of a modern day, pretty popular parasocial relationship that a lot of people have had is with Jenna Mori or Jenna Marbles. When Jenna left YouTube and the internet as a whole, we saw like a really huge public outpouring and grieving period for a lot of people, because they felt so close to Jenna and they felt like they really knew her. They felt like she was their friend. They felt like they knew her dogs, all sorts of stuff. And a lot of people, have developed a really close sort of parasocial relationship to Julian, her boyfriend, who's still present on the internet, still streaming and everything. There's nothing inherently wrong with parasocial relationships. They're incredibly common. When we look at, the most extreme dangerous form, I think, of a parasocial relationship when you're talking about real people as opposed to fictional characters gets into like when people start stalking or trying to meet these people in real life without that person's consent. So parasocial relationships can happen, with fictional characters, actors, entertainers, authors, etc. And they happen very frequently with YouTubers and streamers because they're the very product that they sell. So, a vlogger is bringing you along seemingly for their day-to-day life, talking to you in the first person. Family channels invite people right into their homes and they divest themselves of like a level of privacy that's pretty crucial. And, you have mukbangs as well, which are literally, they were developed for the purpose of the feeling of sitting down and sharing a meal with someone because you otherwise might not have the time to. So they're eating shows, but like they're equal parts like talk show. And like, you, listener, are not immune to parasocialism, and neither are we. And if you don't know Teese or I in real life, you may feel like through listening to this podcast, you know us better, that you can trust us. But the reality is, you don't know either of us, and we don't know you. We're not your friends. If I've never met you in real life, I've never met you in real life, and I have no basis of a relationship with you. But if you listen to this podcast frequently and you're like, I know Cass, like I know how he talks, you know, you might feel like you know me, which isn't the reality. Which I want to bring up a wonderful quote from Brian David Gilbert during his Unraveled episode, Which Dark Souls Boss is the Best Manager, where he pulls off a wig and a fake mustache talking about how he would never change his appearance, and he's like, just kidding, I'm not your friend, and you have no say what I do with my body. Which, yeah, that encapsulates it pretty well.
Big
that is
feelings.
a pretty, yeah, that is a staunch declaration against, you know, some of the more invasive forms of parasocial relationships. Like, why do you think you have the right to go on some random person's video and be like, I really don't like the haircut you have? Like, who cares? It's not your body.
Yeah. I mean, we were just like how we were just talking about earlier, like, oh, I know Teese gets heartburn, I get heartburn too. Teese and I are friends, we're kin, whatever. No, you've never seen me stand in a corner at a party and cry because somebody showed me a picture of a calico critter. Like, we are not friends. We are not at that level unless we do become friends, which that's kind of weird, but okay.
Unless you see me personally apparate as a deer head up through your toilet in a swirling storm of mystical liquid, you don't know me. You don't know me, you know? Parasocialism, I mentioned earlier, is particularly relevant now because of the pandemic. And again, reading from Liebers and Schramm, parasocial interactions and parasocial relationships often appear as very distinct in people with low education levels and incomes, rather, low socioeconomic status. Research that shows that dissatisfaction and hopelessness increase the intensity of parasocial contacts could explain this. Although the findings regarding loneliness are mixed, some results indicate that parasocial relationships with media entities increase with loneliness, current relationship status, i.e. being single, the perceived cost of real or romantic relationships, and unattractive relationship alternatives. We are all stuck inside, hopefully. Most of us are stuck inside, I will say. It is very difficult to communicate with people right now simply because half of their face is shielded, and that has taken a lot of our communication ability away to sort of read expressions and interact with people. A lot of our interaction with other people, if, you know, we're following, you know, regulations and guidelines, is coming through phone calls, video calls, and it's not the same. No one is ever going to tell you that it's just the same.
No.
There is a marked difference in the way we are interacting with people right now, and a lot of us are lonelier. And it's unfortunate. It's, you know, the circumstance of the time right now, unfortunately, but it is normal right now. And I've seen it personally in my own friends who are playing video games more frequently, who are becoming more attached to characters, and like there's nothing wrong with that. You are using it as a coping mechanism in like a totally normal and understandable way. Parasocial relationships, there's tons of studies which have shown their effective use in therapy, and dozens of times over we have found that people who engage regularly with fiction are more empathetic people and, you know, more emotionally thoughtful people. So having a parasocial relationship isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that. Teese, is there any character you can maybe think of that you have a parasocial relationship with that you would be willing to talk about?
You know who I'm gonna say, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
So there's several. Probably the soup du jour is Mr. Ferdinand.
Yeah.
From fucking Final. Oh my god, I almost said Final Fantasy. From Fire Emblem Three Houses. He's just neat, and I like him. But
yeah,
Lord knows, my long-standing emotional attachment character has been Tonica from Haikyuu. I mean, I have sunk hundreds of dollars maybe even upwards of thousands of dollars on merchandise surrounding him. He's been a favorite since for, oh my god, like 5-6 years now, basically since the dawn of the Haikyuu anime. He's been a very deep and emotional part of me. He's the reason why I shaved my head 5 years ago. I cosplayed
is he?
him. He is.
Right.
I cosplayed him, and then I just never stopped shaving my head.
It's liberating.
It is. I highly recommend it. If you feel like you want to shave your head, just do it. But
just do it.
Just do it. But I have to say, Tanaka is very important to me in a way that he is just a character that I really love. And I do have this attachment to him because very often do people brush him off as a character because he's the comedic relief character. And I usually, if I had to be labeled as something in a piece of media, I'd end up either being like the goofy sidekick or the comedic relief character as a person. So I really ended up relating to Tanaka in a way that he cared deeply for the people around him, and I saw more than just the slightly weird, overtly obsessed. I mean, like, he's a 16-year-old boy, so he's kind of like a little sex obsessed.
Problematic.
A problematic fave. But in turn, I've grown to really deeply care about this character, and like, if you catch me in an emotional enough state, I will cry over him a lot. I love him. I have 2 full-size Ida bags dedicated to him. I deeply, deeply care about him, and it makes me actually incredibly upset that the way that Haikyuu projected, they never showed much of the second year, the main character's high school career. So we get kind of like their whole first year, and then we get like a skip 2, and my favorite character doesn't get to be Karasuno's ace. And I just really love him, and like, even when he got a cover finally for the manga, I like got emotional, even though I haven't read the manga in years. Like, I just love him.
But that's a fantastic example of like what a parasocial relationship is. It's not as simple.
He can't love me back. He's an anime character. He's not real. But I love him.
It's not as simple as just liking a character, but it's this level of connectedness where you almost feel like there's a rapport there. And
there's a connection. And do you have one? Tell me about yours, Cass.
I kept thinking about this, and I was like, Can it just be the collective of the Muppets?
Yes. It can
It's the Muppets.
It's the Muppets.
It's the Muppets.
It's Kermie.
It's the entire Muppet Christmas Carol movie. Just
I've
that
never
movie.
Seen it. I've never seen it.
It's so good.
I wasn't
it's
really
hysterical.
a Muppet person as a child. Like, I never really watched Muppets. I haven't seen a lot of Christmas movies in general. Sidebar, guys, but I've never seen a lot of Christmas movies. I've seen Elf. I've seen A Christmas Story once. And I've seen all of the other reindeer.
All of the other reindeer is very good.
Thank
I would highly recommend watching A Muppet Christmas Carol. I mean, even if it's not Christmas time, it's a good winter movie, but it's very funny to watch. There's been a lot of jokes about how they told Michael Caine, it's a Muppet movie, have a little fun with it, and he plays it so serious, but it works. It works phenomenally because you have good. Michael Caine amongst a cast of Muppets. It's good. It's so good. It's very cute. I haven't
seen like any Peanuts movies either. I've never seen any of like the stop motion claymation Christmas movies either. I just never was really into. I was a Halloween baby, like 100%. I was just into Halloween, and my mom would be like, "Let's watch this," and be like, "No."
That's why your favorite movie is Robert Zemeckis' Monster House. I don't know if Robert Zemeckis made that movie.
God, I hope so. Let me look this up. Introducing Robert Zemeckis' Monster House.
Oh no. Oh no. Spoilers, gamers. Robert
Gil
Zemeckis didn't.
What has this man made?
The director of Monster House is Gil Kennan, with screenplay by Dan Harmon, Rob Schraub, Pamela Petler, producers Steve Starkey, and Jack Rapke. Robert Zemeckis made Back to the Future and Forrest Gump. And Castaway. And wow, he really likes Tom Hanks, huh?
He made Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
In a pandemic that's forcing, physical restriction and limited contact, we're going to find that parasocial interactions are more likely, prominent, and appealing based on what research has shown us. Twitter, in particular, has seen a significant rise in user numbers since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And Twitter as a platform, as we've discussed before, is not built for effective communication, socialization, or nuance. On Twitter, you can very easily back yourself totally unwittingly into a corner and an echo chamber bubble where Twitter's algorithm is built to make you feel as though what you're seeing is what everyone else is seeing. And social media in general does this. If you like one tweet, with a few catchwords, right, more tweets like it are going to propagate onto your timeline from the people you follow, which is very rapidly how it sort of spins up these huge cycles of drama where it's like, why is everyone talking about this? Now I need to comment on it ad infinitum, and it can cause just a whole shitstorm. That's also how it gets things trending. That's how Twitter works. It can be beneficial in curating your social media spaces into more positive, innocuous spaces. Or, on the other end of things, it can really enrich and normalize a lot of harmful and extremist thought, which is what we've seen over the past several years with movements of the alt-right, is that you are having people find spaces where they find an entry point, right? Where they agree with, maybe a more Republican view of something, a more conservative view of something. And then their timeline begins to show them more and more things related to that. And then those things are tangentially related to more extreme thoughts, and those propagate on the timeline, and it becomes more and more normalized for that individual. And suddenly you have a person who's radicalized. This is, again, an extreme case, right? This is not, the everyday user experience, but it has happened, and it unfortunately continues to happen. The other tricky part of Twitter is that there's no social rule that we have of what certain engagement means. So if you like something on Twitter, some people are going to read that as like, you saved that to look at it later. Some people are going to read that as, you saw this tweet and you're moving on from it. Some people are going to see that as, you tacitly agree with the idea expressed in that tweet. And that in and of itself creates a whole bunch of problems. Mm-hmm. There are people who retweet things not because they agree with them, but because they think other people need to see them. But then the people who think that retweeting is an agreement are going to, identify that person with those viewpoints. It becomes a mess very quickly. Mm-hmm. And the way social media works, negative engagement is still engagement. Mm-hmm. If you're on YouTube and you dislike a video, that still renders into the metrics of that video and recommends it to more people. The thumbs up versus thumbs down doesn't make something less likely, to appear for other people. That's you would have to skew it so far, but nevertheless, you're engaging with something, and if you get engagement, that's a signal to, advertisers that this YouTube gets a lot of engagement. People are more likely to click through ads there. It's a whole vicious cycle. And engagement is proliferation, positive or negative, which is also a really frustrating aspect of the way discourse happens on Twitter especially. I'm going to give some context before we dive into the meat of this. There is a lot of background information that we need to work through before we get to the events that unfolded on Dragon Age Day and are continuing to unfold. So there's going to be a lot of, study work, but bear with me. I think it's all really rather important just to talk about. Even if we are, kind of coasting over something, I think everything in this episode is worth your own research and time looking into to have a fuller understanding. There are people who have written about so many of the aspects we've already covered and are going to continue to cover, who have said things so much better. And again, as a reminder, we're conversational. I did a lot of research for this, but I'm not a professional. I'm not a journalist. I'm just a person who is very interested in fandom and the weird ways in which it affects people.
We are just two goofy amateur friends. We're not.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a writing degree, but in no way, shape, or form am I like a formal journalist. Like, I don't. I work customer service as a day job. Like, I don't really do any of this. But once again, educate yourself. Make sure you figure out who you're interacting with online, because that's another thing. Sometimes information can look pretty promising and pretty serious, but lo and behold, you find out they're a conspiracy theorist. And what I was going to say earlier was that sometimes it's the simplest thing that will get you indoctrinated without even realizing it.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, when the Wayfair child trafficking scandal happened, that was all bullshit. That was all a QAnon bullshit thing. And so many people heavily believed it and ended up getting roped into QAnon that way. And you, please, like, step back and think about stuff once in a while. Snopes.com, fantastic fact-checking site. Highly recommend.
There is a wonderful, I'm going to say mini documentary. I'm not sure if I've mentioned it before, by Dan Olson, who I'm going to quote later in this episode. His YouTube channel is Folding Ideas. If you look for his video on Flat Earth, watch that.
That's an excellent mini doc.
It is a wonderful example of how seemingly funny and laughable conspiracy theories end up really sort of snowballing you into much deeper waters if you are not careful. There was also that girl on TikTok who made that wonderful pyramid breaking down levels of conspiracy theories. And I think the really important thing with so much of this is the more you talk about and joke about really extreme things like lizard people in government, the more you normalize that thought. And even if you are joking about it, you are normalizing that thought pattern and lending credence and platform to it, even if you are joking about it, even if you are disparaging it. So we need to be careful about what we're saying, how we say it, and we'll get into this a little bit later as well again. But on June 6th, 2020, J.K. Rowling began to make more public tweets which were trans-exclusionary and transphobic. There was a really significant backlash and upset. One of the initial tweets was her talking about an article in which it mentioned people who menstruate. And she was very up in arms in saying, wasn't there a word for that? Something like woman, and it's like, we know what you're getting at, JK. Please stop talking. Then she wrote an essay, which is colloquially known as Turf Wars, which is in reference to how she tweeted it with only that caption, and that was published on June 10th. And then she continued to double down on her transphobia, stating, biological fact and how she had studied this. And J.K. Rowling is an author, and by no means am I ever going to be the person who says, oh, you're a celebrity, stick to acting or whatever. But J.K. Rowling is not somebody who has formally studied in gender studies or in biology, and using old, outdated science that has been proven wrong time and time again about sexual dimorphism in human beings and the way genders are presented does not, you're not an expert, JK. And you as a cisgender woman do not get to speak about the transgender experience. There are dozens of people who have written more extensively on the harm J.K. Rowling has caused with those tweets, remarks, and essays, and continues to cause. I don't have the energy to, sit down and educate you on that. My advice to you is to listen to trans people about their experiences and how they want to be heard and how to be inclusive and supportive of trans people. Do not listen to cisgender people without any actual proper education in the topic, who are there to cherry pick old, outdated, disproven research to further their points. I know a lot of people feel very strongly about J.K. Rowling, both positively and negatively, and that in and of itself is an aspect of their parasocial relationship to J.K. Rowling. A lot of people felt the need to defend J.K. Rowling as though she is not an incredibly wealthy woman who is fully capable of defending herself or just not tweeting. And a lot of that comes back to, people's attachment to Harry Potter. You're allowed to feel the way you feel about J.K. Rowling, obviously without threat of harm to her. That's absolutely not acceptable. But I understand where a lot of people are coming from and their inability to divorce J.K. Rowling from Harry Potter. But my personal opinion is that J.K. Rowling's writing has always been filled with underlying anti-Semitism, gender essentialism, fat phobia, and more. I've read Harry Potter. You know, it's an enjoyable book, but it also has problems. You know, every piece of literature you're ever going to read is going to have problems.
Especially something that's that long and spans that many pages as well.
Yeah, exactly. So after the whole J.K. Rowling debacle, on July 7th, 2020, Harper's Magazine published a letter on justice and open debate. This is now pretty much kind of exclusively referred to as the Harper's Letter, and it was co-signed by many luminaries, including Noam Chomsky, Salman Rushdie, Malcolm Gladwell, and more, but J.K. Rowling signed it. A lot of people had... I feel that the significant backlash that came from that letter was because J.K. Rowling herself had signed it, and these other people co-signing it were seen as being complicit in her transphobia. The Harper's letter is pretty short. It's like less than a page long. I would recommend you go and read it. It is short, broad, and purposefully written in such a way that it is incredibly easy to agree with. That is by design. It does not define the cancel culture it speaks against. The whole purpose of the Harper's letter is to... Actually, Teese, could you read this excerpt from the Harper's letter for me?
I sure can.
The free exchange of information and ideas, the lifeblood of liberal society, is daily becoming more constricted. While we have come to expect this on radical right, censor seriousness is also spreading more widely in our culture. An intolerance of opposing views, a vogue for public shaming and ostracism, and the tendency to dissolve complex policy issues in a blinding moral certainty. The stifling atmosphere, while ultimately harm the most vital causes of our time. The restriction of debate, whether by a repressive government or an intolerant society, invariably hurts those who lack power and makes everyone less capable of democratic participation. The way to defeat bad ideas is by exposure, argument, and persuasion, not by trying to silence or wish them away. We refuse any false choice between justice and freedom, which cannot exist without each other. As writers, we need a culture that leaves us room for experimentation, risk-taking, and even mistakes. We need to preserve the possibility of good faith disagreement without dire professional consequences. If we won't defend the very thing on which our work depends, we shouldn't expect the public or the state to defend it for us.
That, I think, is a pretty good summation of the Harper's letter as a whole. Yeah, it is incredibly broad. And again, that's by design. You know, it was made as a letter so that you could get all these people to agree on it. The irony of this is that for a letter which calls for nuance, it has very little.
Yeah.
Part of the issue with the word cancel is that it has so little consensus in its definition, right? And the way the Harper's letter refers to cancel culture, it refers to it in a way that presents cancel culture as a attack on free speech, which I do not agree with. Free speech, as a protection for the people by the US government, protects you from being jailed or from reprisal by the government for speaking out against the government.
Okay.
It does not protect you from your peers, customers, or boss from calling you transphobic, racist, or telling you to shut up. Free speech does not exist to say you cannot disagree or you have to disagree. And the one issue that I do personally take with the Harper's letter is the line where it says the way to defeat bad ideas is by exposure, argument, and persuasion, not by trying to silence or wish them away. I don't think the goal of cancel culture, as ineffective as it is, has ever been to wish things away. I think the misdirected anger that comes with quote-unquote cancel culture is a lot of times an attempt to deplatform, and often in ways that aren't very productive, you know? If we come back to this point, right, of like, when you lend platform and credence to something, you're normalizing that thought. the difficulty with, you know, we're going to be talking about fascism. The difficulty with trying to sit down and talk out fascism is that you're pretty often going to have people coming from such different ideals and realities that their commonalities are going to be so broad and so dependent on nuances that they won't agree upon. And we'll come back to this, because this is kind of the sticking point of the rest of the episode.
So even in the line where it says a culture that leaves us room for experimentation, risk-taking, and even mistakes, listen, J.K. Rowling actively, repeatedly being transphobic and anti-Semitic and fatphobic and XYZ, whatever you want to say, just being a sucky person hasn't been a mistake in a while, you know?
Yeah.
It's been deliberate, it's been continuous, and I think that proves that she truly deeply believes what she is saying is correct.
Well, and the issue too is that when she made the quote unquote mistake, right, of like tweeting about that article on menstruation, is that people stepped forward to say, hey, this is really exclusionary of trans people. You know, trans men menstruate, non-binary people menstruate, intersex people, you know, who maybe don't identify as women menstruate. Like, you're not...
There's a lot of people who menstruate, yeah.
Yeah, you're doing more harm than good here. Like, what are you trying to do, JK? She doubled down.
Yeah.
She was allowed to make the mistake, but she was the one who chose to double down.
Yes.
And continue to persist in this ideology. And, like, granted, you know, there have been many cases of people making, you know, seemingly one small slip up, and it feels like they get canceled. And we'll come back around to this, but I do genuinely believe that, like, no, I don't agree with cancel culture. I don't agree with what it, you know, with its methodologies, I guess I would say. And I do genuinely believe that we have to give people room to grow as individuals and to become different people and change their thoughts. Because, like, the thoughts I hold today are not the same thoughts that I held and beliefs that I held 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about, like, oh, they made a stupid mistake when they were a kid. Like, no, you need to allow adults the time and room to change as well, because you don't know what circumstance people come from. You can't presume levels of education. You can't presume a certain type of upbringing on people. You have to genuinely allow people the room to grow and change. And yes, some offenses are far more serious than others. And we know the difference between a sincere apology and a fake apology. And I think, you know, a lot of when we talk about cancel culture, we end up talking about YouTubers and influencers, because they're the ones whose entire lives are on social media. There's a reason that YouTube apologies are such a joke, and it's because they're so performative, and they come out right after the controversy has happened, and there hasn't been time for rumor growth, you know? Like, it's impossible to have just changed the kind of person you are overnight, you know? We get the Harper's letter, and then Ayaan Hirsi Ali tweets on July 8th, 2020 in response to the massive backlash against J.K. Rowling. Ayaan tweets, "I praise J.K. Rowling for standing her ground. She is a hero of our time. She is not transphobic, and neither am I. This fight to preserve the free exchange of ideas is worth having, to protect the hard-won rights of women, but also to uphold the principles of our free society." For some context, if you're not familiar with Hirsi Ali, she is a politician, activist, and a writer who has spoken out against Islam, and herself is a survivor of genital mutilation. She escaped an incredibly oppressive Islamic state and is a huge critic of Islam, to the point where, like, she has been put on hit lists, and she is, I believe, protected in the United States because of that. Ayaan Hirsi Ali works for the Hoover Institution and American Enterprise Institute. They're both think tanks. I guess I would maybe describe her as a philosopher. She does a lot of talks now on cancel culture and the dangers of it, which is totally understandable when you are a person whose, you know, career is built out of, you know, free speech and escaping a state where you weren't allowed to speak freely, weren't allowed to act freely. Like, you're going to want to exact those changes in the world to make sure that people are free to speak as they wish. And you might be wondering, Cass, why the heck are you bringing all these people up? Well, dear listener, it's because Greg Ellis references them heavily in his Dragon Age Day video. And I think it's important that you have context of the whole argument that's coming in here. So Greg Ellis then quote retweets Ayan Hirsi Ali's retweet of J.K. Rowling. And Greg Ellis tweets, I praise Ayan for supporting J.K. Rowling and standing her ground. They are heroes of our time.
Prayer
Greg
emoji.
Ellis. Yeah, prayer emoji. Sorry. Greg Ellis allegedly has a history of transphobia and misogyny, but for the purposes of this podcast episode, we're only going to be focusing on his behavior most recently with some backsourcing from 2017. This goes in part to, like, I'm not super interested in digging up things on Greg Ellis from, like, 10 years ago to be like, he's not a good person. Look at what he's... No, like... I would like you to, you know, maybe draw your opinion on Greg Ellis from his more recent actions, which I think are more representative of the person he probably is. If you don't know who Greg Ellis, or Johnny Reese is, Greg Ellis is his stage or professional name, and Johnny Reese is his legal name. He uses both for different purposes. And Greg Ellis is most likely known to you, listener, for his role as Cullen Rutherford in Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition. He voiced Anders in Dragon Age Awakening, but he was recast. I don't know why. I didn't look into that. He also played Theodore Groves in the first, third, and fourth Pirates of the Caribbean movies, where he's credited in the first two as Officer and in the third as Groves. He played Michael Amador in season 3 of 24. Greg is listed in several places as being an Emmy-nominated actor, including his own website. But when I was looking at this, 24's Emmy nominations were for Outstanding Drama Series, Lead Actor, Casting, and a few more, but none were for Greg Ellis in specific or for the ensemble cast in specific. But the Screen Actors Guild Award nomination for Ensemble in a Drama Series would have included him for that season. He might have received an official nomination by some form, but as a viewer and reader, if I see Emmy-nominated actor, I'm going to assume that they were particularly singled out as an actor for a nomination for, like, Outstanding Supporting Actor, Outstanding Lead Actor, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not alone in that.
No, you're not, because I feel the same way.
Yeah, he is a very prolific voice actor. I mean, he's a prolific actor in general, and, like, Greg Ellis is a good actor. He's a fantastic voice actor. But because of his role as Cullen in specific, he has quite a considerable following. Like, the Dragon Age fandom is big, and the Dragon Age fandom is very loyal. Before I get, like, further into this, we're going to be bringing up dog whistling quite a bit. So I want to explain what that means for people who maybe have only heard the term and kind of gleaned it from context clues, or people who aren't familiar with the term. So, from Merriam-Webster, dog whistling is defined as, figuratively, a dog whistle is a coded message communicated through words or phrases commonly understood by a particular group of people, but not by others. Examples of dog whistling can include symbols, like Pepe the Frog as an alt-right symbol when he was appropriated by the fascist right, or even singular words, where dropping the word coincidence when we talk about, you know, like finances or politics a lot has been used as a dog whistle to signal for Jewish conspiracy theories, being used obviously by anti-Semitics. Or a dog whistle can even be the relationship between certain stereotypes or concepts. Teese, would you be able to read the following from this Vox article titled Offensive Political Dog Whistles? You know them when you hear them, or do you?
The right's use of the president's full name, Barack Hussein Obama, falls into this category to the extent that it isn't a shamefully overt attempt to make people think Obama is a Muslim. Among people who consume media that mentions Muslims primarily in contexts that stroke fear and distrust, the name Hussein will evoke those attitudes. Among people whose media diets and personal experiences contain more positive representations of Muslims, the name Hussein might remind them of the late Iraqi ruler, but perhaps won't carry the same sort of emotional weight. A last group of dog whistles works by an entirely different mechanism, stereotype activation. If the stereotypical F is a G, by disparaging Fs, perhaps one can disparage or at least appeal to the audiences who dislike Gs.
That last, like, stereotype activator in specific, you know, An unfortunately good example of it is when you see politicians or people talking about quote unquote welfare queens. A lot of times that phrase is specifically evocative of Black people because of how Black people have been portrayed in relation to welfare, despite the fact that most welfare abuse is actually committed by white persons.
Welfare queens aren't real. They're not real.
They're not real. You
They're not
can't.
real.
You cannot get
physically-
rich off of welfare.
Thank you. You physically cannot. It is not enough money. You cannot
Yeah.
survive solely off of welfare.
You also can't survive solely off of disability benefits, but that's
Nope.
a topic for another day. Dog whistles are so effective because of how they can easily be dismissed or excused as political cynicism or accusation of conspiracy. Dog whistles, I mean, they are made to slip under the radar of less critical thinking. And I think it's really easy for people to hear someone talking about dog whistling. Even the term virtue signaling is a dog whistle now. But people will talk about dog whistling, virtue signaling, etc. And immediately I think a lot of people tune out because they're like, oh my God, you're being conspiratorial. This is ridiculous. You're thinking too much about it. But I need you to remember, political speeches are pre-written. Articles are written, edited, revised. Outfits and accessories are considered. Choices that are made publicly are far more deliberate than we give them credit for. They're not random things that happen. And like, yes, occasionally politicians do stumble into, stupid little mistakes. But that happens far less frequently than I think people are willing to give credence to. And I think there's so many facets to this, but a huge part of why Trump gained the amount of power that he did in such rapid response is because people didn't take him seriously. They dismissed him as being an idiot and too incapable of thought to have a political ideology. So they just assumed it was somebody else that they still didn't worry about for some reason, which has led us to our current place in time. Greg Ellis voices Cullen Rutherford and perhaps has the most fandom engagement because of that character. So I'm going to go over who Cullen is really quick if you haven't played Dragon Age, like Teese, because Cullen's narrative is actually relevant to this.
Interesting.
Cullen Rutherford has seen varying amounts of screen time throughout the Dragon Age franchise, with his most forward character arc being in the third game, which is Inquisition. There are divided readings of Cullen within the Dragon Age fandom, which is inevitable, kind of given the choose-your-own-adventure style of the game. All readings of Cullen Rutherford are valid. Cullen's narrative, super quick and dirty, is you have a young boy who idolizes and dreams of becoming a Templar, which is a mix of religious clergyman and a cop enforcing protections against magic. He is traumatized and tortured during a rebellion by the subjugated and imprisoned mages. He watches his fellow Templars and his commander turn to a dangerous substance and abuse its power. He witnesses and survives a terrorist attack on the church by a mage in a move to spark a revolution. He becomes the military commander of the Inquisition and struggles with his own addiction, and is potentially redeemed and struggles to come to understand the suffering of mages, their right to freedom, trust, and respect. I.e., his narrative is all about learning, listening, and trying to become better after an upbringing which taught him a centrist to right-leaning way of thinking. It's also a totally complete narrative arc that he has. So when people are saying they don't want Cullen in the next game, it's not just because of Greg Ellis, but it's also because Cullen has had a full character arc. He's been in every single game, and people want new, different characters. And they're not as interested in Cullen anymore, which is totally understandable. Like, it kind of feels like every facet of Cullen that could be explored has been explored in the canon narrative of the game. Cullen is a romanceable character in Dragon Age, meaning that not only can the player character get an even deeper insight into who he is as a person, they can have their character engage in a full-on romance with him, and I'm talking kissing scenes, sex scenes, flirting, all sorts of stuff. Like, Dragon Age games have that baked into them. They've got these romances. Oh my god, we're already at the hour mark. But yeah, so like a huge draw for Dragon Age is like the romantic relationships you can have with some of the companion characters, and people love that. People love that. It's great. Cullen's romance is written very much as like a sort of a hurt comfort. He's, very charming. His narrative is about redemption and communication and understanding, more especially if your player character chooses to be a mage, because that adds like a complicating element to their relationship, because you have an individual that Cullen is inherently afraid of because of his upbringing, who he's now in love with. It's a fascinating dichotomy. But there are readings of Cullen that see him as harmfully ignorant, if not all out dangerous to the freedom of mages, and those readings are also totally valid and worth examination. We are specifically looking at Cullen and Greg Ellis's portrayal of him as framed through the portion of the fan base that loves him, because those are the fans who are more likely to have engaged in the Cullen romance positively and who probably view Cullen as like a more positive character. People who don't like Cullen usually don't like Greg Ellis, just by extension, which is a little silly. But Greg Ellis isn't Cullen and Cullen isn't Greg Ellis. They're not the same. No voice actor is their character. No character is their voice actor. Again, reading from Liebers and Schramm, in most cases, the intensity of parasocial phenomenon increases when people perceive the media character as humorous, intelligent, and credible. This has special relevance in persuasive contexts that aim to persuade media users of something: advertisements, politics, health communications. Humorous, intelligent, and credible are all pretty apt descriptors for Cullen. He has frequently been described by the fandom as sort of a Disney Prince character, and it's important, before we get into this, again, I really want to reiterate, Cullen Rutherford isn't Greg Ellis, and he wasn't made by Greg Ellis. Ellis reads lines.
Ellis didn't write him. He didn't write him. Doesn't own him. It's not him. It's just his voice.
Yeah, exactly. It was writers, artists, and animators that made Cullen into the full experience that feels as real as he does, and that is not in any way, shape, or form trying to diminish an actor's role in shaping a character, because that's also really important. But Greg Ellis isn't Cullen, and he didn't make Cullen, and they are separate entities, and it's incredibly important to remember that they're not the same because of the way Greg Ellis tried to use Cullen Rutherford. Then, There were fans who were talking about it, because at one point Greg Ellis was a guest at this same con I'm about to talk about at a later date, or at an earlier date, I'm sorry, where it was $155 for a event with him, where you got like a signed photo from him, which is a lot of money.
That's a lot.
And a bunch of people were like, no,
Stan
absolutely
Lee didn't even
not.
cost that much.
Well, and people were like, he's not Cullen, though. Like, if it were the writers and the dev team, I would maybe pay that much. But not for just an actor who read his lines. Like, So, in 2017, Greg Ellis was the VIP guest at Magic City Con, which is in Alabama. What I'm going to be talking about was documented by Tumblr user Teeny Turtle. They went to Greg Ellis's VIP events and shared what it was like, because this too apparently caused quite a stir in the fandom of like inappropriate behavior by Greg Ellis. Allegedly, staff had to delay the event because Ellis changed his entire plan and presentation shortly before. He held a quick Q&A and then played a cover of Ed Sheeran's Save Myself on the piano, which is a choice. Ellis then allegedly shared his podcast and asked the audience to close their eyes and, quote, feel. Teeny Turtle describes in their Tumblr post how they are a survivor of a cult, and this little, red flag for them just made their stomach flip. Because, this kind of thing is a cult tactic, where you ask people to fixate on, their emotions. Teeny Turtle writes that in his podcast, he, quote, talks about how his parents wanted a daughter and how that shaped a lot of his emotional life. He also addresses emotional baggage and how it can limit us in our lives, and how we have to open up and allow ourselves to feel these things so that we can move forward. He talked about childhood trauma, not entirely in depth, and sort of teased the rest of the podcast. This went on for at least 15 minutes, probably longer. Okay, that's already pretty inappropriate. According to Teeny Turtle, Ellis went on to share the following sentiments. Mental wealth issues, mental illnesses, trauma, etc., can be cured by us coming to terms with our emotions and learning not to suppress them. Mental illnesses do not require any sort of psychotropic medication. Medicines made for the purpose of mental health are only made to keep people from dealing with their emotional problems.
What?
Terrorism
Oh,
could be solved if
Christ.
we all just sat down and talked about it.
He allegedly gave handouts then to all of the panel attendees for reisispositive.com, his life coaching program.
Oh, no. Sir.
There's so much wrong with
Christ
everything described there.
almighty.
It's inappropriate at best.
And he doesn't have any extra degrees, right?
No.
Oh.
And it's dangerous at worst. Don't worry, we're going to get into Reese's Positive.
Jesus Christ. Okay, let's go.
A room of attendees at a Comic-Con are not prepared for you to air your personal trauma and dispense your own ideas of medical and mental health when they sign up for a voice actor Q&A. There's one thing about, like an actor being like, I'm going to talk about something a little difficult right now, and like maybe glossing over it. But sharing your podcast that is expressly about your personal trauma and baggage is so inappropriate. Greg Ellis, or Johnny Reese, has no formal education or licensing as a clinical social worker, psychiatrist, or psychologist. For him to give medical advice on your mental health, saying you don't need psychotropic medication or medication for your mental illness, is horribly inappropriate and reckless. That's terrible. You shouldn't do that. Do not take advice about your medication from anyone but your doctor. So inappropriate. So inappropriate. So he handed out pamphlets to Reese's Positive. And Teese, you might ask me, Cass, what is Reese's Positive?
Cass, what is Reese's Positive?
It's Johnny Reese's life coaching website. Greg Ellis is constantly cross-promoting himself, which, you know what? Stay on your hustle, stay on your grind, get that bag. Not this way, though.
Girl boss material.
It's one thing to be like, hey, like, follow, and subscribe my YouTube channel as I talk on my podcast. It's another thing to go to a comic convention and hand out your life coaching. Oh my God. Okay. This isn't even the worst part. We're not even at the worst part yet. I just hit the mic. We're not at the worst part yet. Okay. I think before we get deeper into this, I'm not a fan of Greg Ellis, but only after having done this research, and like, I'm coming to this episode now with the inherent bias of disliking him and not trusting him because of the research I have done.
My brain is just elevator music.
Take that into account. I am inherently going to be biased against Greg Ellis, Johnny Reese, because of the actions he has done and because I disagree so much with them.
I don't trust this man despite what Cass has described to me.
Yeah. He links to his own short film on Vimeo in his About the Founder section on Reese's Positive, which feels kind of weird to me. And we'll circle back around to the cross-promoting of himself. The tagline for Reese's Positive is integrating performance art with the phenomenology of feelings. Teese, could you please read to me this definition from the Simple English Wikipedia?
Phenomenology is a way of thinking about ourselves. Instead of asking about what we really are, it focuses on phenomena. These are experiences that we get from the senses, what we see, taste, smell, touch, hear, and feel.
It is I think at its core really it is about your experiences and your perception. And I mean, our realities are our perceptions. We can try and broaden those, but we can't escape our own perception. So I can definitely understand, especially for an actor, the fascination with phenomenology and integration with that, with your feelings and performance art. Like, that on its own does sound really interesting and like a really cool field of study. On the Reese is Positive speaking page, where you can book Johnny Reese for speaking engagements, the site says, so it has the splash up top where it says, book Johnny Reese for your speaking engagement. And then it says, as seen on, and shows icons of NBC, ABC, TNT, HBO, BBC, and more. Teese, if you saw that, what would your idea be?
Don't tell me it's him in his acting career situations.
Oh, it is. Yeah. But
See, I'm hip to know what's going on here, but if I was an unsuspecting layman, I would not know, and I would assume that he publicly spoke and was considered an expert on these channels.
Yeah, exactly. On behalf of Reese's Positive, but that's not the case.
No.
These are just networks that aired the shows he was a part of as an actor. It's not necessarily wrong or entirely duplicitous, but it's just kind of misleading. Kind of like calling himself an
duplicitous.
Emmy-nominated actor.
It's duplicitous. You can
And
say
it's just like, it's these little things like this. If it said, you know, it says as seen on, if it just said has acted in production shown on, you know, like
Yeah.
that would be more clear. There is an obliqueness and purposeful vagary in a lot of the ways I feel he presents himself. And it just sort of further clouds the idea of who he is, and I think, you know, what his actual bona fides are. Said from someone with very few bona fides, you know? Greg Ellis, on June 13th, 2018, and I know you say, Cass, why are we going back in time? I thought we were talking about 2020, and I'm saying, look, we're starting with 2017 of the con incident, and we're moving forward. We will get to Dragon Age Day. I promise you. We will get to Dragon Age Day. But
go back to go forward.
I need you to stick with me. Trust me. So on June 13th, 2018, Greg Ellis tweets,
Once elected, I support all presidents, regardless of party affiliation, ethnicity, cultural background, age, political experience, or name.
okay. Twitter user at WC Shepherd replied,
I think you just broke the hearts of thousands of Cullenites, LGBTQ folks who adore the Dragon Age franchise because it included them. Donald Trump is a hate-filled man who appointed a conversion therapy proponent as his vice president.
they are not wrong. Greg Ellis quote retweeted WC Shepherd and said,
Speaking on, quote, behalf of thousands of fans, end quote, of a video game and suggesting I, quote, broke their hearts, end quote, because I support all who hold presidential office is ludicrous. Video game fandom is not exclusive to LGBTQ or those not hate-filled about POTUS. I believe in equity and inclusivity.
He tagged the president as if
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Trump himself
Yeah.
would like his tweet.
yeah,
Oh my god,
you-
I hate this man.
you can't support Donald Trump as president and also believe in equity and inclusivity. Those two things don't go together. Your support of a president implies that you support their stances and their actions. And Donald Trump has, from the beginning, before he was even elected to office, been so anti-black, been so racist, been so sexist. I just... It's really frustrating. It's a really frustrating conversation to have, and it's a really frustrating thing to see people say.
We've been living through it. I mean, all Americans have been living through it for the past, oh god, 5 years now.
Yeah. There's a distinct difference, right, between believing in democracy and the democratic process of our country and voicing your support of a fascist leader. And this isn't something where it's like, I know a lot of people right now are hearkening back to when the looting starts, the shooting starts quote from the president. But let's also remember that he took out a full-page spread in the New York Times to call for the execution of the Central Park Five, who were wrongfully charged and convicted for a crime they didn't commit because they were black.
Son of a bitch.
Hey, if you had any questions about my or Teese's political leanings, this episode should clear them right up for you.
As if, like, our Twitters don't state it, but
Yeah.
whatever.
Ellis then tweets,
I'm drawn to out-of-the-box thinkers and feelers like...
and tweets and tags a list of people including Kanye West, Jordan Peterson, and Eric Weinstein.
Ooh.
Y'all know about Kanye West, and if you want to see Eric Weinstein's particular brand of bullshit, just check out his Twitter for a hot second. I want to talk about Jordan Peterson, though, because he will come up again. Jordan Peterson is a Canadian psychology professor and believes the, quote, masculine spirit is under assault. He is a frequent user of the, quote, traditional values or eternal values, quote, dog whistle. This is a common sentiment by the far and alt-right, which evokes ideals of long-held patriarchy, white supremacy, and the elevation of such ideas. Masculinity, as we often identify it today, is actually based on the marketing of the early and mid-1900s to sell products to men and instill capitalistic ideas of the nuclear family. That is a whole other can of worms. capitalism has shaped and formed the American family unit for its own purposes. But traditional masculinity is fake, invented, and imposed on men at their expense. We're getting into a lot of like feminist ideology here in this episode too. I'm going to read a quote from an interview that Nellie Bowles did for New York Times with Jordan Peterson.
Violent attacks are what happens when men do not have partners, Mr. Peterson says, and society needs to work to make sure those men are married. Alec Manassian was angry at God because women were rejecting him. Mr. Peterson says of the Toronto killer, the cure for that is enforced monogamy. That's actually why monogamy emerges. Mr. Peterson does not pause when he says this. Enforced monogamy is, to him, simply a rational solution. Otherwise, women will all only go for the most high-status men, he explains, and that could make either gender happy in the end. Half the men fail, he says, meaning that they don't procreate, and no one cares about the men who fail. I laugh because it is absurd. You're laughing about them, he says, giving me a disappointed look. That's because you're female.
Ew.
Okay. We're going to keep coming back to this point. But Greg Ellis received some pretty obvious backlash for platforming Jordan Peterson amongst his list of, quote, out-of-the-box thinkers. When you platform someone and spread their ideas, again, you are normalizing it. And in the context of Greg Ellis' tweet, whether he meant it or not, there is a reading of it that says, right, that you tagged this person who you're drawn to, you must agree with them. That's going to be the general assumption that most people are going to make, is that if you are tagging someone saying, I'm drawn to out-of-the-box thinkers and feelers, you're saying you're drawn to Jordan Peterson. Why are you drawn to Jordan Peterson, who is like such a hate-filled individual? Greg Ellis tweeted on June 14th, 2018, quote,
indicative of our current culture that I tweet about inspirational free thinkers and up pops a trolling social justice warrior who can't separate me from my work. Conflating my inclusive and equitable opining with a video game character I voice is social justice warrior ident politicking full blown, end quote.
Greg Ellis being upset that his character as a person and the character he plays can't be separated is gonna age like milk, and has. We're moving up to 2020 now. On June 2nd, 2020, Greg Ellis posted a video to his ThinkSpot. For a moment, we're going to diverge to talk about ThinkSpot as a platform. ThinkSpot was founded by Jordan Peterson, and Wikipedia defines ThinkSpot as
an online social networking service started by Jordan Peterson following the banning of several content producers from the membership platform Patreon. Peterson and Dave Rubin conceived of the site together as a platform centered on free speech.
Once again, I would like to remind everyone that free speech is a protection for the people by the U.S. government that protects you from being jailed or being the target of reprisal for your government. It does not protect you from private or public companies saying, hey, you violate our terms of service, you can't use us. It is fully within the right of any non-federal company, private or public, to ban or suspend you from sharing hate speech, fascist ideals, or whatever else they please. And a, quote, public company, like Twitter, isn't actually owned by the public or by the people. It is just being publicly traded so that you can buy stock in it. I moved my mouse cursor up again. It doesn't mean it's publicly owned by the collective population in the same way something like the public service of the U.S. Post Office is, you know? That's not something... Your taxes do not pay for Twitter. The other thing that really bothers me about this, like, persistence of freedom of speech by the right, by the far right, by the alt-right, is that I don't ever see those people standing up for sex workers who are continually deplatformed and chased off of websites. I do not see them speaking up in defense of women who are attacked by mobs and mobs of people telling them to shut up for speaking about feminism or issues of women being assaulted in the workplace. I don't know. It's one of those things, right? Again, where it's like, if this is such an important issue to you, why aren't you actually standing up for the people it is harming the most and disproportionately? Dan Olson, who I mentioned I would bring up again, he's a media critic and has experience working in film. He's a streamer as well, but he has a fantastic video on the Folding Ideas YouTube channel called VidMe, or Why Platforms Aren't Your Friends. And in this video, Dan makes an incredible point where he says,
YouTube is very successful, monolithic even. If you simply try to create YouTube, who are your users going to be? Well, generally speaking, it's going to be a lot of users with small to tiny channels, and it's going to be the people that were too toxic for YouTube. That second one is a far bigger deal than I think most people in the position of platform development really appreciate. If you compete with a monolith, the first people to jump on board will be the people who were tossed off the other ship, and most of them were tossed off for a reason.
This shit writes itself, Cass. It really does.
but like this is right why when it's like,
yeah,
deplatforming is like, it is so crucial to stamping out a lot of fascism, because you're removing the platform and you're stifling it. And like, where the fuck are they gonna go? VidMe? You use VidMe, Teese? Let's talk about fucking Parler.
Parler is gone, baby. It got shut down.
And it's fully within the, like, I know Ben Shapiro is freaking out because he's like, the government is attacking your rights. No, independent app companies, publicly traded or not, decided, hey, we're not going to host your app because we know it was used to plot an insurrection, and also you're not moderating it at all. You need to moderate this. And the owner went, nah, I don't want to moderate it. So that's why it got removed. It's been a very long year.
Yeah.
We are on the 16th of January, and it's been a very long year.
We're halfway through the month, baby.
So, Greg Ellis on June 2nd, 2020, posts his video to ThinkSpot, where he has an account, and it's called The States of America. And its description reads,
a video compilation of some of the peaceful protests, civil disobedience, news footage, and milestone events of the past few days in the States of America, underscored by the words and music of Michael Kiwanuka.
In preparation for this episode, and I will be linking to it, I did a full transcription of the Cullen Rutherford address that Greg Ellis made. I will share that publicly. There is a link to a mirror of the original address you can download because it has been removed, as well as a mirror of this video so you can understand what is being shown and seen. But I'm not super great at writing ID text, so if there's anyone who would like to volunteer to write some ID text, both for the Cullen video or for this video, it would be super appreciated. The video, The States of America by Greg Ellis, features footage and photographs of the 2020 summer protests in response to the murder of George Floyd, with overlaid text. The video opens on a shot of scaffolding that's spray painted with "I can't breathe," and presumably it was Greg Ellis who edited the photo with a red pen to cover the "I" with "we." Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech begins to play, and it is drowned out by Ronald Reagan's speech at Brandenburg Gate.
What?
And the overlaid text of the video reads, "The States of America, stirring, our inhumane race. We are all response-able. We are all the respondent." We will come back to this video.
This sounds like a villain in like a cartoon. Like, he has such little decorum about all of this that it almost feels like a caricature in a way.
Yeah. He has many catchphrases, and I've listed some for us to go through towards the end here. So if you would like to have a sober drinking game or a fun little bingo card if you're going through Greg Ellis's Twitter, again,
Can we make
not
a bingo
to bother
card?
him, but just to read.
Can we make a bingo card?
If you want to make a bingo card, Teese, you can.
Okay. I only have MS Paint, but I'll figure it out.
But do you remember when I was talking about the quote retweet of Ayaan Hirsi Ali? We're going to jump back to that.
Okay.
So on July 8th, 2020, right, Greg Ellis quote retweeted Ayaan's tweet with,
I praise Ayaan for supporting J.K. Rowling and standing her ground. They are heroes of our times.
There is a pretty rapid and immediate backlash, and people are upset and hurt. They feel not only hurt by Greg Ellis, but tangentially disappointed in Cullen Rutherford, and people start calling for Ellis to be removed from future Dragon Age games, not just for this quote retweet, but for Ellis's prior behavior and offensive behavior regarding the summer protests. Mark Dara, who is the executive producer of the Dragon Age franchise, begins replying to people's tweets against Greg Ellis with, quote,
Like you, it's important to us that the people we work with are aligned with our BioWare values. This will be apparent when we're ready to announce which actors will be lending their voices to the game." End quote.
Greg Ellis responds to this message on one thread with, quote,
"Capitulating to a small-minded, bigoted mini-mob by skulking in the Twitter subthreads, posting generic responses to hateful posts that misrepresent who I am and what I stand for. Cancel culture at its virtue-signaling aberrant worst." End quote.
He's literally... Oh my god.
Ellis
I'm
makes...
exhausted. No wonder
Ellis...
why you felt like this all week.
This isn't even the worst part.
Oh, Jesus Christ, I know what's coming, I know.
Ellis makes repeating demands that Dara list the values of BioWare, but Dara, smartly, does not engage with him any further at this point. By the way, just for fun, I looked up BioWare's company values because they're listed right on their website, and they're listed as humility and integrity, courageous creativity, passion for excellence, amazing storytelling, and achieving as a team. And then Dragon Age Day happened.
Oh no.
Okay, so Dragon Age Day happens, right? And the bittersweet part of it is that Mark Dara and Casey, the general manager at BioWare, both resign. And that will become a little more pertinent. But on that day, Mark Dara kind of had enough with Greg Ellis and started to go after them. And the fandom just absolutely adored watching these two tear each other apart. It was very funny. It was mostly people cheering on Mark Dara because the fandom does not like Greg Ellis. But so... on Dragon Age Day, which was December 4th, 2020, Mark Dara resigned from BioWare. Greg Ellis began tweeting that Dara's resignation was forced, but to my knowledge, there hasn't been any actual corroboration of that. A lot of people were really upset because they thought it meant, bad things for Dragon Age 4, but Patrick Weeks is still that, it's gonna be okay. I have full faith in the team there. Greg Ellis tweeted,
"Special announcement. Lightning bolt symbol. Dragon Age's Cullen..."
I did not notice that lightning bolt until this moment, and oh my fucking god, that's so much worse than I thought it was. We'll come back to that.
"Special announcement. Lightning bolt emoji. Dragon Age's Cullen speaks to fans. Hashtag the code. Pirate flag. Hashtag Dragon Age Day. Hashtag justice for Johnny Depp."
Johnny Depp has nothing to do with the Dragon Age games.
No, all right. So I have not talked about the whole Johnny Depp thing in the background of all of this, and that is because it goes so deep that I literally did not have time. I would have to spend much longer on this episode. I do not know enough about the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case to talk about it comfortably or to voice my own opinion, but what I will say is that Greg Ellis is incredibly passionate about it, has spoken on it multiple times. He feels that Johnny Depp deserves justice and was done wrong by Amber Heard. To my knowledge, Amber Heard did admit that she lied about a significant portion, which to me is deeply disturbing, and absolutely she should receive repercussions for that. You don't fake allegations of abuse or assault. That's horrible. Greg Ellis, of course, too, is tied to this because he worked with Johnny Depp on Pirates of the Caribbean. So he's done tons of interviews and stuff where he's former Johnny Depp co-star speaks about Johnny's behavior, that sort of thing. That's going to come up. The video title is Dragon Age's Cullen Speaks to Fans. It was streamed via YouTube on December 4th, 2020 by Greg Ellis. Teese, could you read the video description for me?
Yes.
Cullen Rutherford from BioWare's Dragon Age series speaks to his most loyal fans about his latest quest to defeat the hordes of cancel culture mobs who propagate inequality. An in-depth look of what's really going on behind the scenes in the video game industry from Cullen's perspective by his voice actor Greg Ellis. Social media links redacted. Links were provided to Ellis's personal website, a project page for his series on the male experience.
That's the respondent.
His performance and life coaching program.
That's Reese is positive.
And his Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and ThinkSpot pages. Love and Hate composed by Michael Kiwanuka. Dragon Age soundtrack BioWare.
This video can only be described as Greg Ellis employing the parasocial relationship people have with Cullen Rutherford to proliferate his own politics and business. And I know, we've been through so much already. You're like, Cass, how the hell does any of this Greg Ellis shit have to do with parasocial relationships?
It's a
Well,
roller coaster.
Well, dear listener, he's using it to spread his propaganda. Allegedly.
An hour and 33 minutes into the episode, we have found the link.
And we're only on page 13 of 20. He introduces himself as Cullen. Greg Ellis spends the entire near 40-minute video role-playing as Cullen Rutherford, a fictional character who he does not own or have any legal right to. And he uses music from Dragon Age Inquisition throughout the video, specifically music that's composed for significant rises into action, or notably ensembles, or the ensemble song that is sung by members of cast, including Ellis, which happens during an all is lost moment of the story. Here's the deal. If we get a collective of at least $50 donated to our coffee, I will read this entire video transcript and tackle it point by point. It's like 10 pages long, typed out. But if we get $50 to our coffee, I will do that. I will take that hit, and we will sit down and we will talk about it.
Would you do your best Cullen impression, or would you read it?
I can't. I can't. Okay.
I don't know what he sounds like. So
the part of this that like, the part of this that is like really frustrating is that Greg Ellis is an incredibly intelligent, well-spoken, well-read man. Okay. And, like, his voice commands respect. The man is a phenomenal actor. I'm never going to deny that. He's fantastic in the role as Cullen. I would like him to be recast. But, like, he's a great voice actor, and he has, like, a really pleasant voice to listen to.
So unfortunate, using it for evil.
But you can get me to read it in my weird squeaky voice if you want.
For $50, Cass comes with a price tag, and so do I. I'll read it too, I guess.
I can be bought for any amount. If you give us $8,000, I'll be silent forever. We'll cancel the fucking podcast.
Me too. I will delete my Twitter, which is my main source of entertainment in my life.
All right, I will read a portion of the opening of this video. I cannot play it for you because there's so much copyrighted music that Greg Ellis doesn't own. In case you were curious, this video, I don't know when this video was taken down, but it was made private. Someone probably got a cease and desist, maybe. More than likely. People did tweet at Mark Dara being like, can Greg Ellis get in trouble for this? And he was like, he absolutely can.
Yeah!
So, the video in portion goes,
Dear Cullenites, recently a small vocal mob of social justice warriors attempted to have me and my voice actor Greg Ellis tossed into the cancel culture wastelands. An ignorant few bigots made wild aspersions, outlandish misrepresentations, and slanderous vulgar claims of transphobia and racism, and shared them loudly with a few impressionable more. This is my response to the mob's inquisition of me and my voice actor Greg Ellis, and how we attempted to understand the resultant blight it spread across the fandom.
I am gripped right now.
Integrity is earned in turmoil, not merely asserted in comfort. As such, I invite you to join me on our most integral mission to date. We are about to embark on a thrilling new adventure, beyond the realms of any video game. Please, join us on this most magnificent morality quest as we venture forth to a new land of possibilities, a brave new era of enlightenment, one where people of all sexes, genders, cultures, ages, religions may find more civil discourse, encourage more harmony, more common threads of well-being. Getting older is inevitable. Becoming an elder is a skill. Sign up to become an elder. Help us banish the reputation savages and cancel culture hedonists. Find your key, board the fellowship, chart a course, blaze your trail and spread the cipher. Subscribe with us as we come together to set sail and chart a course for integrity and seek to instill the code.
That's a call to action. I mean, there's very little that all of that is, but it's a call to action.
That's quite literally when you have a page requirement and you need to keep just saying random words to reach the page requirement.
Greg Ellis was like, no one's going to take this seriously if it's not at least 35 minutes long.
Exactly. Exactly what he did.
Yeah, transcribed, the video script itself runs over 8 pages long, single-spaced.
Jesus Christ. Oh my God. Sorry, guys. to keep taking the Lord's name in vain. Let me take that one from the top.
Say the Maker. It's a Dragon Age episode, Teese.
Oh, the Maker!
A lot like the Harper's letter, the points in this video are vague and varying, and Greg speaks out about cancel culture without ever actually defining what it means to him. He recounts most chiefly how he was criticized and attacked for his support of J.K. Rowling and his States of America video. He uses self-coined catchphrases throughout and repeatedly, and he reveals that instilling hashtag the code is about adopting the chivalric code in response to the Me Too movement. Okay. As a person who has taken multiple courses, actually, in medieval history and medieval literature, buddies, chivalry isn't what our modern mutation of it is. He reads loosely from the Wikipedia entry on chivalry, but doesn't ever define it or outline what that new code actually is. Chivalry comes from the conduct of the military and battlefield etiquette. It is nebulous and has evolved a dozen times over, and the closest we really have to commandments in chivalry are Gautier's 10 Commandments, which are, again, about military and knightly conduct in battle and an enemy engagement, and is not about how you treat women or your fellow human outside of battle. So, adopting this chivalric code doesn't really mean anything. It's not relevant. He uses the traditional masculinity dog whistle that we kind of talked about a little earlier. And then Greg launches into talking about Johnny Depp and how he's been persecuted, and how Johnny Depp being made to resign from Fantastic Beasts is not unlike what Greg Ellis himself went through as the Dragon Age fans called on BioWare to remove him from any potential place in Dragon Age 4. Teese, could you please read this quote for me?
So impressed by Ion's support of a woman and fellow artist, and by JK's recent championing of young illustrators on social media, Greg retweeted his support to both women. Clancy then retweeted his support. Then the mob came for them both, accusing them of being, of all things, transphobes. The spurious assertion would be laughable were it not so harmful, both to Greg and Clancy's reputation and also to the greater transgender community, of which both Greg and Clancy are allies. One of Greg's closest friends is transgender.
Same. That don't make me special.
Having a friend who is trans does not make you immune to transphobia, and even trans people can be transphobic.
Yup.
The trans experience is widely varied and so different for every single person, and like we see huge jumps in like what is considered progressive and acceptable, like from generation to generation, but also from community to community. But cisgender people do not get to decide whether or not they're being transphobic. White people don't get to decide whether or not they're being racist. You don't get the say on that. I'm sorry, you don't. Greg ties himself in this paragraph, I feel, to Clancy Brown very heavily. Clancy Brown is best known as the voice of Mr. Krabs, but has played many other roles, including the Kurgan in Highlander, and was the face, voice, and mocap actor for Hank Anderson in Detroit Become Human, which is probably what people who are a little more familiar with current day fandom are going to be familiar with in terms of kerfuffles and hubbub. Greg hosted Clancy on his podcast, The Respondent, where they called it the Gamers Gateway event. And the initial idea was, I think, that they were going to talk about the weird sort of overlap that happens between them as actors and their fictional characters that they play. I watched it. I listened to it. It is a pretty unfocused and informal conversation, initially on their feelings of what happened on Twitter and the things they said. And without naming it, they kind of started to introduce the idea of parasocialism, but they never get around to it, and they end up talking about work experiences more than anything else. They had a PhD professor on there who's also a game architect to talk with them about it, and like that guy's cool, but he was mostly just excited, I think, to talk to Greg Ellis and Clancy Brown, because like these are two really big voice actors. Of course, like if you play a ton of video games, why wouldn't you be excited? The difference in the parasocialism that occurs with Clancy Brown and Greg Ellis is that Clancy in Detroit Become Human is quite literally the face of Hank Anderson, and there is a much thinner barrier there than there is with Ellis as the voice of Cullen. Cullen doesn't look like Greg Ellis. Greg Ellis doesn't look like Cullen. But Hank Anderson does look like Clancy Brown, and so there's a little bit of a different relationship there. I've now mentioned the States of America video a few times, and it's because he brings up this video as evidence of cancel culture. As a refresher, this video is a collection of filmed footage from the 2020 summer protests, some that he himself filmed, some that he grabbed from news sources, etc. And it opens on that photo of scaffolding spray painted with "I can't breathe," which has then been doctored to read "We can't breathe." In the video, Greg Ellis uses a photo of Devontae Hart hugging Portland Police Sergeant Brett Barnum in 2014. You have probably seen this photo. It is a photo of a young black boy hugging a white police officer. The young boy is wearing a fedora and he's crying and he looks very uncomfortable. The photo was staged, and Devontae Hart and his 5 adopted siblings were actually murdered by their adoptive parents in 2018 after years of being beaten and starved by those same parents. It was an incredibly inappropriate photo to be circulating during the protest to further this idea of purported unity. Greg, in his Cullen video, says, quote,
"When Greg tweeted the video out, someone pointed out that the random image he used 4 minutes and 33 seconds into the video was a fake, and that's when the cries of racist started from the outrage mob. In a response to one angry mobster, Greg stated that every life has value, that everyone has worth, that all lives are sacred, all lives matter. That's when the cries of racist started from the bigoted mob," end quote.
Okay. I'm going to break this down a little bit further when we get to it. You were called racist for saying all lives matter and using black suffering for your art, as well as poorly sourcing your own images to fit your visual narrative. That's why you were called racist. It wasn't for using a quote-unquote random image. There's no random image when you're making like something for your personal production company and putting it up on your ThinkSpot. That you picked out that image for a reason. It's not just a random image. And you're the one who failed to research that image and the context of it. And like, if that comes back on you, that's your own fault. Repeatedly throughout the Cullen video, Greg Ellis voices his upset that BioWare did not publicly defend him during this, and he goes on to rally to the right of free speech and denounce cancellation, saying, quote,
"I will always defend the rights of women and all people like this, and indeed all human beings, to express their opinions without the fear of cancellation, public shaming, or violence, regardless of whether or not I agree with them. I support everyone's right to exist and speak their mind. I believe in equity of opportunity and that everyone is created equal. Black lives matter, and they don't matter more than anyone else's. I love everyone. I support everyone's life choice and decision to love whomever they please and to identify with whatever gender they prefer. So yes, all lives do indeed matter to me. I think it's sorry and very sad that this sort of statement has become negative in our society when I meant it only as a statement of equality and affirmation of the intrinsic value of every single human life."
end quote. So, I'm white. Teese, you're white passing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are not the people to give you an entire lecture on why this line of thinking isn't helpful. What I will say is that all lives matter is a right-wing dog whistle at best, and it refuses to acknowledge that Black lives and the lives of other people of color have been so diminished and undervalued. It is the equivalent of shoving your fingers into your ears and screaming, and it fails to take accountability and instead internalizes and flips the conflict to victimize white people once again. And for a man who espouses the importance of communication to further understanding, he fails to see that Black Lives Matter is a bold and desperate attempt to communicate, and all lives matter is the proverbial slamming of the door in that face and blocking that communication out. It is so antithetical to the things he claims to be in favor of, and it just kind of gets worse. Also, total side note, it's not the gender that trans people quote unquote prefer, it's the gender that they are.
There's no preferred pronouns, it's they are your pronouns.
Yeah. Greg uses Cullen Rutherford's narrative in an attempt to emotionally appeal to the listener. And he says, quote,
"Mobbing is social murder, and by definition, people cannot survive their own murder," end quote.
If cancel culture was actually effective in the way that all of these people claim that it is, all this fear-mongering, right? J.K. Rowling wouldn't have been able to publish another book. Brock Turner, the Stanford rapist, wouldn't have been able to find a well-paying job with benefits. Jeffree Star, who has had numerous allegations and proof of his racist conduct and behavior, wouldn't have the cult following and extensive makeup line and brand that he does. Cancel culture is only truly effective in the way these people speak against small-time independent creators without financial resources or social safety nets to support them and help them through the fallout. Cancel culture is incredibly toxic, and it is bad, but it has been made into this very easy scapegoat for people to cry when they're being held accountable. And we do need to allow people to grow and change and apologize for past misdeeds and to move on and to become better people. But when you have speakers in the House claiming that people are trying to employ cancel culture on the president for inciting a riot at the nation's capital, we've got a bigger issue. And I think, it's like, okay, well, there's really big issues in the world. Why does this matter? And it's like, well, it doesn't, right? I personally feel that Greg Ellis, in his own way, is helping to fan the flames of this and is contributing to a larger culture that uses this cancel culture as an easy scapegoat to keep from being held accountable and for being made to, make change, be a better person. He then goes on to tell the audience about his life as Cullen, but he's just paraphrasing from the Dragon Age wiki, which is kind of laughable. Buddy, I think if you knew anything about your character, I don't know that you would be employing him to use this narrative. And he finishes with, quote,
"Now have I too been slain? When Kirkwall's circle fell, innocent people died in the streets. Could you see why I want nothing to do with that life?" End quote.
And it's like, that's a video game with a very different circumstance that, like, yeah, sure, is partially applicable here, but, like, not in the way you're employing it. But it's a direct appeal to the audience and relies heavily upon a strong parasocial relationship to Cullen Rutherford. It's underhanded and slimy to use a fictional character that you have no legal right to spread your harmful ideologies and try to recover your own public image. Like, I'm sorry. That's my opinion. I think it's slimy and it's underhanded. It's kind of weird too. It's gross. We're near the end, Teese.
We're almost there, guys.
I wish that were the end. Like, I wish the Cullen video was the end of it, but it really isn't. Because it's my personal feeling that Greg Ellis platforms hateful, harmful ideologies. He will sort of obfuscate his personal beliefs by saying he's a moderate Democrat, as though that makes up for the things he has said or done or hosted on his podcast. When you actually look at the American political spectrum, it's important to understand that Democrats actually fall to the right of the center of the political spectrum. They are only left in relation to the right in American politics. You have your center of the political spectrum, right? And then to the far right, you have fascism. And then to the far left, you have like socialism, communism kind of deal. Democrats, as they currently are and how they operate in our country, and I mean, this is changing day by day, are still to the right of the center of that political spectrum. Bernie Sanders is actually the only like big front runner we've ever had who falls to the left of the center. He's like the closest we've ever gotten to getting an actual left-leaning individual in there. So Greg Ellis's podcast is called The Respondent, which he brought up and boosted in the Cullen video. There's also a whole portion of that video where he just takes a very long break to boost a charity event that he held. And he's just like listing the people who joined it, which like, whatever. Okay. I don't really see how that's super relevant, but a lot of his work on The Respondent centers on family law. He has gone so far as to call it the cartel of family law. I do not think it is appropriate to deep dive into Greg Ellis's personal and private life. That is none of my business. I would strongly discourage anyone doing it for yourselves either. I think that's really invasive. He has made it publicly known, though, that he's a divorced father of, I think, 2 sons. And so, like, obviously family law is going to be really important to him. That's his prerogative. That's totally okay. There's, like, one quote from the beginning of an episode of The Respondent.
How are we expected to believe all women when all men are not provided the same presumption of innocence that criminals get? And with radical feminists within the Me Too movement pushing this unfair agenda of guilty until proven more guilty, judging men in the court of public opinion with a rallying cry, all men bad, is it any wonder that many people are now beginning to question the merits of and the motives behind some of the women involved in the Me Too movement?
That is a multifaceted statement right there, but I think most people who have been charged of a crime would probably agree that even if they're not convicted, it doesn't just go away, and that everyone regards them as being innocent. Family law in America in 2020 has actually favored fathers, and studies have shown that family court doesn't bias in favor of mothers, and in part that's because very few fathers seek custody during divorce. But because a lot of these divorce proceedings are private, it's a little harder to get information on that. He is particularly concerned with views on masculinity and the perception of men. And in a blog post on Real Greg Ellis, he writes, quote,
"Is it any wonder that many people are now beginning to question the merits of and the motives behind some of the women within the hashtag MeToo movement? The family code book has been pillaged and plundered by the hashtag MeToo, hashtag toxic masculinity, hashtag smash the patriarchy mobs, and that they have ideologically skewed society's views on traditional family values. Men no longer seem to matter."
I have a question.
What's up?
So this is a blog post, you're saying?
Yeah.
Do hashtags work in blog
No.
posts?
No,
Okay.
but like I understand why he's using them because
Yeah,
like,
that's fair.
and there's part of that I think like putting a hashtag in part almost discredits and undermines what's being talked about, and like I don't know if that's deliberate on his part.
Mm-hmm.
It's really okay. Me Too really took off in 2017 when Alyssa Milano used it.
Mm-hmm.
Me Too has never been exclusive to women.
No, never.
If men, like the fact that men didn't feel comfortable engaging with that is a really sad thing that feminism and Me Too seeks to serve, so that male victims are taken more seriously and are heard and feel comfortable and safe enough to speak up. And I'll come back to this whole toxic masculinity thing later, but like these are things he harps on again and again, and like I think it's pretty clear that like he feels personally attacked by these movements in some fashion. He feels hurt by them. He feels unheard by them, and like I'm sorry for that. And like every movement is going to have its, less than wonderful people. Like you're going to have feminists who are trans exclusionary, who are anti-black, and like I really wish those weren't the people whose voices got raised the loudest sometimes, In that same blog post, he writes, quote,
"How are we expected to hashtag believe all women when all men are not provided the same presumption of innocence that criminals get? In the courts of family law, 2 people enter the courtroom, and when they leave, one is a parent, the other is a visitor."
I don't I don't have like specific statistics on that last portion of it, but again, I don't know that like I don't think our justice system does a good job, and like I do think that there are inherent issues with our justice system. Like I'm not going to disagree with you on that, Greg, but like the way you're going about this I do disagree with. Like this idea that you have to tear women in specific down and elevate men even further in this context, I that makes me uncomfortable. His blog post, tweets, and podcasts feel a lot like spaghetti to me, where he throws a dozen different ideas at the wall and doesn't fully elaborate on any of them and leaves an absolutely dizzying mess in his wake. And what comes through to me as a reader is a really strong resentment towards women speaking up about their abuse and mistreatment by men. That is my reading. That is my perception. Other people are probably going to get different views on that. When he was asked by Houston Family Magazine what his definition of the modern man is, Greg writes, quote,
"There are many characteristics that I think make up a modern man, and I'm evolving my ideas as I move through working on the respondent. If I were to pick a few words, I'd say stoicism, courage, empathy, and vulnerability. That last one can be a bit hard for men. The traditional male role is to project strength and to hide vulnerability."
I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. The most frustrating part about so much of Ellis's work as a podcaster and writer is that he's deliberately avoiding the answer that feminism has provided. Feminism only centers around women in that it seeks to bring women to an equitable place with men, but that equity and equality is also there to serve men and to allow them to be as diverse as they please without harming themselves under toxic masculinity. One of the things he brings up, one of the talking points of like Eric Weinstein, of Jordan Peterson, is, you know, toxic masculinity is labeling all masculinity as toxic. Toxic masculinity is not a statement that all masculinity is toxic. That, again, is a purposeful misrepresentation of the argument. Toxic masculinity is a harmful portion of masculinity that has been adopted and taught to young man and proliferated throughout time. It is an adjective distinguishing a portion of a noun. It is not people sitting down and saying like all aspects of masculinity are toxic. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, that's not what that is. That's semantics, but those are semantics that matter because that's what's led to like a huge miscommunication here and a huge divergence that has further propelled the alt-right because so much of the alt-right is built on this idea of like quote unquote traditional values, quote unquote traditional masculinity. Oh. In that same Houston Family Magazine interview, he writes, quote,
"I think it's time for men to speak. Men need to stand up and explore the nature of the modern male experience in this era of a deteriorating respect for family, to sever ties with hashtag toxic masculinity and serve up hashtag tonic masculinity. What are we going through and what is our future? Men and fathers need to be the authors of their own stories of pain and struggle for redemption. They need to defend and celebrate the positive side of masculinity, and they need to advocate for the changes necessary to make life better for everyone." End quote.
There's a lot to digest here, Cass.
Men have been allowed to speak for so long.
For too long, dare I say. No, I won't say that.
Okay,
but...
let's use the inception of Me Too, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're looking at Me Too, women have had about 3 years where they've finally felt heard.
Yeah.
And men are very upset about it. Like, listen, as everyone's experience as a transgender person is very different. I understand that I do not have the cisgender male experience. I'm never going to. I was not raised or socialized as a young child and adolescent as a boy. I remember being on the other side of things and perpetually frustrated, and still am, about being silenced, about being told to keep quiet. I, too, both as a victim and survivor, am deeply, deeply frustrated by the rare occurrences of false allegations. Amber Heard making false allegations in her situation deeply upsets me because it makes it more difficult for other victims to come forward, right? Mm-hmm. There's so much here. There's so much. We're on the last 2 pages though. What the fuck is tonic masculinity?
I don't know.
What does that mean?
I don't know. But it sounds like a really bad like drink special for a really shitty bar. They sell penis drinks.
Welcome to the Proud Boys bar. We've got toxic masculinity on tap. I'm sorry, tonic masculinity on tap.
My favorite brand of tonic water, tonic masculinity.
It's just tonic water with like a little bit of semen spun into it.
I was going to say, you've heard of penis music. Now get ready for penis drinks.
Penis tonic.
Actually, but I shouldn't even say that because, once again, there are people who are masculine that don't have penises, so there we go. And just, oh my god, it's just so bad. I just want him to shut up. Shut up.
Teese, that's an invasion of his free speech.
I don't give a shit. He should go to free speech jail. I'm tired of this man.
On more dangerous fronts, he seems to have coerced an apology from a Twitter user at one point. He allegedly coerced an apology from a Twitter user at one point for unknown remarks because their tweets were deleted, and it seems his tweets were also deleted. He is a notorious tweet deleter. I have screenshots of what I can, but unfortunately some of it is backsourced from other people's screenshots. But he writes,
quote, "It's all too easy to target people for the wrong reasons because of little misperceptions."
Ew.
Why did you have to gender the word misperceptions in this way, Greg? It's one of the
M-I-S-S.
Yeah, it's MISS hyphen perceptions. Like it's a little red flag. Like in and of itself, it's not a weird thing, but it's within the whole picture. It's like, I don't know about that one, Chief. Actually, I do know about that one. It's not good. I will say, colloquially, he went after AOC in a tweet once, and somebody responded with something to the tune of, "You write for Quillette. I'm not taking your political opinion." And he replied with, "Wrong. I've never written a word for Quillette." And he's right. He hasn't ever actually written for Quillette. But Greg Ellis narrates the essays published in the Quillette on a podcast he produces in partnership with them called Quillette Narrated. If you don't know, the Quillette is a far-right online publication that frequently employs the use of pseudoscience and dubious sources. I don't care if some liberals write for it. It's far-right. And as we discussed again, you can be a liberal and still fall to the right of the political spectrum. On his podcast, The Respondent, Greg has hosted some of the following guests: Brett Weinstein, who's allegedly transphobic and racist; Heather McDonald, who's an alleged fascist and writer of The Diversity Delusion, How Race and Gender Pandering Corrupt the University and Undermine Our Culture; Andy No, who's a far-right journalist who is allegedly seen amongst the Patriot Prayer, which is another violent, aggressive far-right group, and who has allegedly used the protection of the Proud Boys at political rallies and demonstrations. He's also the dude who had an anti-fascist throw a milkshake at his face, and people got really upset.
I was that person who threw the milkshake.
He's also had Jonathan Kay, the senior editor of Quillette, and, oh god, he's had Enrique Tarrio, who's the chairman of the Proud Boys, which is a neo-fascist and male-only organization. Greg tried to host an event which he kept saying, the BBC tried and failed to do this. So he tried and failed to have a, quote, high-ranking member of Antifa join the episode, but Antifa isn't an actual organization or doesn't have any structure, and it's a collective belief and movement of anti-fascism, so there's no representative that can show up, and it's unclear who was invited in the first place, which I don't like. He claims he reached out to numerous persons who helmed clubs or organizations, but again, doesn't disclose the name of this person or any of those organizations or clubs.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go to the Antifa clubhouse after work today. Like, oh god, you hear yourself? Like,
so throughout the interview, Enrique Tarrio speaks into a mic that is flashing a white lightning bolt on the back of a black mic at the screen. And here's the thing with lightning bolts and lightning bolt emojis: if you see two lightning bolts right next to each other, that is absolutely 100% a Nazi symbol. The single white lightning bolt on black was the sign of the Hitler Youth and comes from the double Sieg runes used by the Nazi Party. The double runes, called the SS bolts or SS lightning bolts, are actually an officially recognized hate symbol of the Anti-Defamation League. Tarrio himself was banned from DC prior to the riot on January 6th because he was charged with burning a church's Black Lives Matter flag. It could just be a power symbol indicating that his mic is on, but his mic is not facing him. It is facing the camera. And when you are quite literally a neo-Nazi, I'm less likely to give you the benefit of the doubt on that symbol. And listen, I don't believe in like this this sort of guilty by association that we have where it's like, oh, you follow so-and-so, you're complicit in their behavior on Twitter. No, 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 no. But what I'm talking about here is that Greg Ellis has platformed these people to allow them to disseminate their ideas and beliefs throughout his own fan base. He is offering his platform for alleged fascists and neo-Nazis to speak out and to share their ideas. And listen, I listened to quite a bit of The Respondent, and I tried really hard to watch the entire discussion with Enrique Tarrio. But the moment that Greg Ellis was like, now, Enrique, why don't you define for me what Antifa is? And Enrique Tarrio went, anti-fascists want the destruction of civilized society as we know it. I was like, I can't do this. I can't.
Anti-fascist just means that you're anti-fascist.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that hard.
And the thing is that, like, Tarrio keeps bringing up, he's like, I was sharing with a member of Antifa that, I shared with him the doctrine of the Proud Boys, and he was like, oh, we want the same things. And it's like, if your tenets are so broad and mutable, then you can get anyone to agree with them. If the Harper's letter didn't show that, I don't know what else will. If you make it broad, like, yeah, nobody wants a dictator in control. Fascists don't want that. Socialists don't want that. Nobody wants a dictator in control. Of course you're going to agree on that. Oh, God. Greg Ellis's belief that sitting down and talking out issues like fascism doesn't work. The paradox that we get with tolerance is that you have to be intolerant of intolerance. And when afforded a platform or a space to be listened to and entertained as credible, you lend further credence and validation to those ideas. You cannot offer fascist ideologies, transphobia, racism, or any other hate-filled rhetoric any quarter. You have to, like fire, smother it out, or it spreads and it grows. And I'm talking about, like, conversations at home with your family where if you are capable to, and you catch your parent using something that they might not identify as a slur and saying, like, hey, that's really not a cool thing to say. Those are the kinds of conversations you can effectively have. Mm-hmm. But, like, inviting two extremists to the table and expecting them to find common ground and solve all their issues right then, that's not gonna work. All you're doing is, like, offering your platform and paying credence to a fascist. And the employ of the parasocial relationship he has with his fans via Cullen Rutherford to promote his work and his podcast is, I feel, slimy at best and dangerous at worst. His writing and speaking to me feel oddly hollow and really dense with offensive underscores because it's just this rotating wheel of dog whistle after dog whistle where the use of, like, repetitive slogans and hashtags and pseudo deep thoughts feels like this weird little cult indoctrination. His phrases like tonic masculinity, men too, people stand for what they hate and what they stand against rather than what they love and stand for, instill hashtag the code. We are living in an era of woke capitalism in which corporations pretend to care about social justice to sell products to people who pretend to hate capitalism. Physical distancing, social connectedness, unblock the apology pathways, the ice age of unreason. It's just, you're building a brand, and I don't like what your brand is about, Greg Ellis. I don't think your brand is safe, and I don't think your brand actually really seeks to protect people. I don't think Greg Ellis is evil. I don't. I disagree with what a lot of he does. I don't hate him. I'm perpetually frustrated by his tweets, by his expressions. I think, just like you should be wary of anyone else on the internet who's a talking head that you don't know, be wary of him. Question his views, be critical of what he's saying. I would hope that you can also be critical and thoughtful about what we're saying, That's it. That's my big spiel on the abuse of parasocialism by Greg Ellis.
Amazing, and my episode is gonna pale so poorly in comparison. Oh my god.
It's one of those things where it's like the Cullen video on Dragon Age Day seems really silly, But when I think about how it can very easily be an entry point for some people into more radicalized thinking that believes in harming and hurting people, nah, like, I'm sorry. You're platforming Enrique Tarrio, and Enrique Tarrio can stand up there and say, you know, I don't think, you know, women are subservient to men, but I do believe in traditional American family roles. Like, that's a dog whistle, my guy. You need to know what that means and understand what that actually means. Because, like, sure, you can sit on your Twitter all day and say, yeah, I'm a moderate Democrat, but walk the walk, talk the talk, you know? If it looks like a duck and it sounds like a duck, then it's probably a duck. As a fun reminder, if we get a collective $50 donated to us on coffee, I will read the entire transcript of the Cullen address for Dragon Age Day, and I'll break down and talk about every point he makes in it and how it bothers me and why it's unfounded or why it's weird nonsense. Let's see, other things. As a reminder, again, seriously, leave the people we talk about on this podcast alone. Don't bother them. Absolutely do not harass them. We do not condone that. That's terrible behavior, and you be a better person than that. Be kinder. Once more, to the person who asked for a Dragon Age episode, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got what you were looking for. Come back next week, and we'll be talking about parasocialism as it relates to Lil Michaela and KDA and Seraphine, which is sure to be hopefully a lighter conversation, a little bit lighter than this one, but a good one. I'm really excited for it. And then after that, we'll be talking about Ready Player One. So we're going to take a break from the politics for a little bit. Teese is really upset.
God, Ready
you were the
Player
one
One.
who suggested it. You were the one
sure
who wanted to do it.
I really was.
That's your problem.
And I read Ready Player One already. I am going to pick up a copy of Ready Player 2 tomorrow because my PDF of Ready Player 2 got corrupted twice somehow. And Ernest Klein, you have bamboozled me for the
Ernest Klein looked at you and said, fake gamer.
I want you to know I also watched the movie again today.
No one said you had to watch the movie. Nobody said you had to watch the movie.
Because I wanted to get angry all over again.
We also didn't say you had to read the second book, but then Teese was like, I'm going to read the second book. And I was like, well, fuck, now I have to too.
My mom was like, you need to stop getting angry about stuff. I said, no, like, you don't understand. And maybe she was right.
I will have a link to the Google Doc of the transcript of the Cullen video for people to access, and that again has links to mirrors of the original video and Greg Ellis's States of America, in case you don't want to go to ThinkSpot for obvious reasons, because fuck giving Jordan Peterson ad revenue. If you want to reach out to us, please feel free to reach out to us on Twitter. If you want to talk to us about the podcast, please reach out to us via the podcast account. That's at AuthorsNotePod. You can also reach us via email. That's authorsnotepod@gmail.com. If you want to find more of my work, I'm sure to be blocked by Greg Ellis soon. That's at Valhethella, VALHETHELLA. Teese, where can people find more of your stuff?
You can follow me at Vicunyad. Maybe Greg Ellis will block me. I don't know. That's VICUNAD. Our theme music is done by James Yaiullo, and you could find him on Bandcamp under James Y. Greg Ellis, don't block James, please.
And our cover art was done by the wonderful Nyaliest. You can find her shitposting about games, gacha, and rhythm, and Final Fantasy XIV on Twitter at Nyaliest. That's NYALLIEST. If you want to help support us and contribute to the Evil Coffee goal, you can leave us a coffee donation where Authors Note Pod over there. We also have a card to pertinent links. If you enjoyed this episode, or you're like, oh my god, I got a friend who fucking loves Cullen Rutherford, wait till they hear this shit. Share the episode with them, maybe. Share the episode with a friend. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Even if you didn't like it. Because as we talked about, engagement is great. Until next time, stay safe. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. I know this one's a really long and heavy one, so if you made it to the end, like, pat on the back. I'm sending you a gold star.
Big kiss.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yes, Mark. Go woke or go broke.